Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Low Carb Lifestyle Podcast. Today, I'm here with Dani Conway. Dani, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Hi, Tracy. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's lovely to meet you. So, you are someone who has been in the low carb space umbrella for a very long time. So, very curious as to how you got here. But before we get into that, would you like to just share with everyone a little bit about what it is that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Dani Conway, and I specialize in women's health, women's weight loss, reversing conditions such as PCOS, thyroid, autoimmune. More recently, working with women that are struggling with breast implant illness. I actually had my own breast implants removed about 6 months ago, so I'm very, very familiar with that. And just an overall picture of health, getting to the root cause and eliminating the symptoms so that, we don't have to struggle with the various things that we tend to accept as normal. And really, in the long term, they're not really optimal for optimal health.
Yeah, fantastic. So, how then did you get into the low carb space?
Yeah, so years ago, I was actually 65 pounds overweight on a fat-free diet myself. This was when I was in my 20s. And not only was I overweight, but even, more importantly, I had a lot of hormone and digestive issues. And again, I was in my 20s, so it was a very hard time to have all of these issues. I had blood work. My doctor said I was normal. But yet I was having a lot of these symptoms, and I needed, fat-free diets, yo-yo diets, restriction diets. The weight wouldn't come off, or the weight would come off and then it would come back on and then some. I had terrible food cravings, excessive hunger. Those are probably my top two symptoms or issues, if you will. And then the digestive issues that followed, a lot of yo-yo, like up and down, could only restrict, to 1,000 or 1,200 calories for a few days at a time. And then I would overeat, and it was just a terrible cycle. And at that point, I was very confused because the doctor said I was normal. And in my 20s, yeah, it was great that my blood work was normal, but I wasn't willing to live that way forever. And I really, quite frankly, didn't really know how I'd make it to 40, at that point. I'm 44 now. And so grateful that I kind of found this path by accident. So that's the background of how I started in the low carb space. And really from there was experimenting, and the low fat thing didn't work. And, with excessive hunger and cravings, that led me to, maybe, it was Atkins was really big back then. That's kind of what the low carb diet was known as back in 2005, 2006, which was about the time that I started this. And just kind of from there, experimented with higher fat foods, more meat, more red meat, and just, continued on that experimental phase.
Gosh, your story is so familiar. I mean, it's so familiar. It sounds so similar to mine. And I know many people listening as well. It's just so sad because there's still so many people out there that haven't, don't think there's another option, still going on the same path. It's kind of like, oh no, I'm just not doing it hard enough, or just got to reduce my fat even more, or,
Yeah.
like it's that something, I don't know what happens to sort of tell people, no, you know what? It's actually a completely different path you need. It's not more of the same, but it takes such a long time for people to sort of, I suppose, wake up and want to try a completely different path. So you said you sort of came across it by accident just from trying, the Atkins. I'd love to hear more about that.
Okay, yeah. So so that's basically I kind of just started to eat higher fat foods. Like I was finding I was craving cheese and I was craving steak, and I thought, well, even though I craved ice cream a lot too, I was like, well, let me just try these other foods and kind of see what happens. So I was really going into it somewhat blindly. I mean, I did some research on Atkins at the time, and the way that diet was formatted. But then just kind of, again, continued into more low carb, more meat, more fats, and then started learning more about like grass fed and more quality foods. So that became part of my lifestyle very, very early on. And then, kind of stumbled upon finding more information about keto and kind of fast forwarding a little bit now. It took me about a year to lose about 60, my weight, so 65 pounds. And then I continued to improve my body composition. So it wasn't just about, first of all, I wasn't a like magical story. In 4 months, I lost 60 pounds or 70 pounds.
Most people aren't,
Yeah,
are they?
I always tell clients, and I always tell people like, there's way more stories out there about the people that took way longer than 4 or 5 months than the ones that you're hearing that did. So just remember that, like, the slow route is always the best route as far as I'm concerned. But that being said, took over a year to lose the weight, then continued to improve body composition. But also in that time, I really got educated on the hormone imbalances and the adrenal imbalances and the importance of rebalancing the gut health from the, from the root cause, from the inside out, so to speak. So that's, kind of fast forwarding a few years, that's where I got into holistic health and really kind of went from corporate job into, knowing that I wanted to help other women and other people with this, because I figured if I was struggling, I wasn't the only woman struggling with no answers. And so that's what led me into the various holistic nutrition and functional medicine certifications that I have and still, of course, use now more than ever. So.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, something you said there piqued my interest when you mentioned the adrenals and things like that, because there's such a myth out there that low carb actually causes adrenal fatigue. Are you able to address that a little bit? I just get that question all the time.
Yeah, it's really common. And I think, so my approach, let me try to kind of dive into this a little bit. So my approach with nutrition being the foundation for everything that we do. So if food isn't right, nothing else is going to be right. So that's first and foremost. Now, with that being said, we have this craze of fasting and intermittent fasting and extended fasting and all these different type of fasting. And there's a lot of benefits to all of that. I've done every type of, most types of fasting other than like 30 to 40 days. That's not my jam. But that being said, we always have to fuel our bodies correctly first in order to get the benefits that fasting provides. So I think when people try to fast too soon, they run the risk of having the dangers of even more imbalances in blood sugar. Of course, blood sugar and cortisol have a very close connection with each other. And then, of course, all the hormones are connected. So you get a cascade of hormone responses with hunger hormones and sex hormones and all of that. So my approach personally is fueling before fasting, making sure that foundation of nutrition is dialed in correctly, making sure someone's eating right for their body and their metabolism. So, I mentioned I was on a lot of restriction diets years ago. Well, even when someone is eating too little, if they're low carb, keto, carnivore, whatever you want to call it, if they're eating too little, that's still a restriction diet, even if they're eating carnivore foods or animal-based foods. And that's really super key to the start of balancing their hormones and their adrenal system and their cortisol. So with that being said, when someone is eating correctly and getting the right nutrients, that is the key to starting to rebalance those hormones. Fasting, it's a great tool, but it's a tool. So it has to be implemented when it's appropriate for that person, when things are starting to balance out, in the right time frame. So maybe it's not 24 hours or OMAD or, eating every 18 hours, but maybe it's a 12 to 14 hour fast for a woman who's trying to rebalance her adrenals and her sex hormones.
I love that. And I think I see in the space a lot this whole diet mentality coming in, understandable, I guess, when it's what we know. We're
Right.
so convinced that, we can't trust our body. How much should we have on our plate? How many calories? How many macros? Like, I kind of that all just blows my mind now. I'm just like, no, you don't have to do any of that. Like, let's just let's just tap into the gifts we all have, which is that ability, to listen to our body, which might be hard at the beginning. We've got to unlearn a whole lot of stuff, right?
Yeah. So if I could speak to that for a moment, because I fully believe in intuitive eating. And the problem is that when we start, the goal might be intuitive eating, but our our hunger cues and everything are so out of balance, and the waters are so muddy that it's hard to conceptualize sometimes that concept of intuitive eating when somebody first begins. So in my practice, I actually developed my own macro formula a few years back because so many of the macro formulas out there are still so restrictive. So like N equals one for me, like for all these years, when I would run my own stats on a lot of these formulas, and I'm super active equestrian athlete, working out a lot, they still had me like the recommendations were like they're 1,271 calories or something ridiculous like that. So that prompted me to create my own formula because I was like seeing all these women who were very active with hormone imbalances, gut issues, all these problems, yet their bodies weren't healing. And of course, they weren't losing weight because weight loss happens as a byproduct of that body being healthy and in balance. But of course, they're not losing weight on such a limited amount of nutrition and nutrients. Like they're coming from a depleted place and then they're trying to lose weight, but they're depleted, right? So that being said, so for me, even when I was still losing and changing body composition, I mean, I was consuming, my baseline was 17 to 1,800 calories, which would make, the typical restriction dieting mentality person like really fearful. So we have to change the mindset. We have to eat enough, animal-based nutritional, nutrient dense foods, and allow our bodies to start to heal. And then, we can focus on the weight loss, but the weight loss will happen, as a byproduct of what we're actually doing when everything is correct, when that foundation is correct.
Yeah, I absolutely love how you've explained that. I think it's so true. I think I have such a pushback with, or an, issue with this whole calorie thing. So I get it. Calories are just, they're important, but I think from what I've seen for women, it's much more of an issue to men. It's usually men that they don't have all these sex hormones. They don't have all these other things usually, for them, it can just be a bit more simple. But I just see, if we don't address that as women, when we want to really, as you say, rebalance things. And I love how you said that weight loss is a side effect, because it truly is, but it's not really what we're so driven for that first. It's what we want. We want that quick change. And it's just our mind goes to, oh, I have to restrict, or I can't eat too much, or, but as you say, it's so much about what you eat, really, isn't it?
Right. Like the, nutrient dense foods and making sure that our bodies can get those nutrients from the foods that we're actually eating. Of course, that's a huge part of it as well.
Yeah.
I think. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, talk a little bit about that, because it is I certainly have seen people, but women in particular, do everything right with the diet, but still don't get the results that they're wanting. And, just that absorption issue or digestion, or there's stuff going on there that they might need extra help addressing.
Yeah.
Is that what you see in your work?
Yeah. So the digestive process, I mean, everything starts in the gut, hormones. It's kind of like, what years ago I was taught, rebalance hormones first and then work on the gut. And, probably 5, 6, when I say years ago, I'm talking about 15 years ago. And then kind of, this industry is ever evolving, as we both, very much know. And probably 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, I kind of started to watch how clients would heal and approach things with the different protocols that I was doing. And it really became clear that the gut has to be addressed, number one. And the reason that, I see that is, number one, absorption of nutrients. So if we're not absorbing our nutrients from food, the hormones aren't going to get those nutrients in order to be able to rebalance and heal and get what they need. We look at mood disorders and mood imbalances, depression, anxiety. That's a gut issue, right? Neurotransmitters are made from our amino acids. What is amino acids? Protein. Where do we get our protein? Quality food, right? So it all comes back to the ability to, of course, eat the right foods, but then absorb the nutrients that we're actually eating.
Mm-mm. So I had a I don't know if you know Dr. Pran Yoganathan. He's an Australian
Mm-hmm.
gastroenterologist who's very talks a lot about diet and gut
Mm-hmm.
health, obviously, but typically not the standard conversation that we generally get, which is very plant-based, very probiotics, very a little bit different. Yeah, no. Now we were talking about the fact that even for most people today, because of the when they're in the womb, what their mum eats, and then a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people, babies born by cesarean section, fundamentally our guts, are very different than they were, a generation, 2 generations ago, because the diet's just changed so much. So, I think most people are kind of starting a little bit behind the 8 ball. And then, of course, if we go and eat the standard recommended diet, well, we know that, and I know my listeners know that's not going to help us either. So where do you start? So, for example, with the client that comes to you now at the I would imagine most people need addressing with their gut. So where do you start with that?
So it still goes back to making sure that they're eating the right foods on a daily basis. So, I know that there's a lot of, this is a good thing to kind of chat about for a minute. There's a lot of controversy, if you will, about tracking macros, especially within the carnivore community. Keto, it's a little bit more the thing to do as far as, macros go and formula and all of that. But my goal with macros and giving a client a macro formula, whether it's keto macros, meat macros, low carb, I don't have a one size fits all approach. So I really work with the client based on what their individual body and metabolism need. So that being said, the goal isn't to track macros for the rest of their life. The goal with a macro formula is to make sure to get them to eat what they need on a daily basis. So not beyond their full and satiety signals, but to know that they can have up to, let's just, for example, 130 grams of protein a day. A lot of women that are coming to me to begin with, they're only eating 60 grams of protein, max of quality protein a day. And they're wondering why their
Mm,
hair is falling out. And they're wondering why
mm.
they have period problems. And they're wondering all of, why they're depressed and anxious and all these things. So going back to your question as far as like the gut health goes, is again making sure that that foundation is right, making sure that they're getting enough protein, enough good quality animal based fats. If they are going to eat carbohydrates, whatever those carbohydrates are, making sure that they're quality and the right choices for that individual person based on whatever is going on. All of that is going to help to start to heal the gut, and then eliminate the foods that are causing inflammation and causing problems, whether it's upper GI or lower GI, and then kind of go from there in terms of adding in functional testing or stool testing or supplement protocols or things like that. Because I'm very much a believer in all of that. I mean, I wouldn't be where I am without stool testing and supplement protocols and supplements, but they should be used supplementally, right? So they're never the primary thing. Food first, supplements second, and then that combination is really where somebody's going to get the best results.
Yeah, I know. That's great. It's such a myth, isn't it, that we just want the quick fix, we want the pill, but
Mm-hmm.
we don't really want to change anything else because
Yeah, or do the work to get there. As I always get asked, and maybe you've heard this before too, like, how long is it going to take me to heal my gut? Like, I don't know. I can't even pull out my crystal ball and tell you, but I promise you, if you get on the right track, you'll be on the right track. It's like, what else would you be doing otherwise, right? So,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And, just you talking about your story, I mean, evolution is a part of it, that's part of the fun, as your body changes, as you age, as new things come out, you try different things, I think it's a really nice way to live, as opposed to just, I think sometimes we think, oh, we've just got to get this just tell me what to do, tell me what to eat, and then I'm going to get there. And it's like, well, then what are you going to do after that? You're going to go back to how you always ate. If you do, you'll go back to where you were. Like it's just that whole mindset of being flexible, I think, and being curious. And the more we're like that, I mean, nutrition's not black and white, is it? Right?
Oh.
People think, oh, it so is, but we know it's not.
Yeah. And I mean, I look back at my own journey. So it's been, 15 years now that I've been doing this. I've been, professionally over 14 years, and then personally over, 15 years almost. And sometimes I feel like, gosh, it's so great now with all the communities out there, and the social media pages and the podcasts, and and all of the information that's available. And so, then I look back at years ago, and I didn't have all those tools, but I still, kind of got down the path and stumbled my way and got there. And it's like, I don't necessarily wish that I could do it over again, because I was able to learn so much along the way. But I do always love to remind people, like, you're so lucky you have all these resources now. And I feel like it could work in both ways. Like, there's a lot of information, and sometimes it's information overload, and people are wanting to know, like, I just want to know, like, the thing to do. And so that's, that kind of thing. But
well, that's why they would hire someone like you, or me, because
yes,
we can help sort of demystify that. Because you're right.
Fine tune and tailor it. Yeah, exactly.
That's right. That's right. I mean, a lot of my clients, they've been in this space for years, but they're still struggling to make it work. And it's, it is fantastic, but you can see, as we would know, there is a lot of conflicting information too, and I think people find that really confusing. Classic example I'd love your thoughts on is the whole protein and fat. Protein has become, definitely more the thing these days than it was when I started in the space. And personally, I find it fabulous. I love eating
Totally.
protein. Yeah, I love all the benefits that have come with it. But let's talk maybe about your view on that, and fat. Where does that sit, and do you see a difference between males and females on that scale of how much they should be eating, I guess?
Yeah, so I love this this piece of this part of the conversation. So, I feel like definitely the high protein, prioritizing protein has come a long way, which is great, because it's so commonly common that I say we women, and even men that I've seen in my practice, are under eating on the protein side of things. So I find that with protein and fat, nutrient needs change throughout the cycle, like menstrual cycle. So some women do well on high protein overall, or higher protein. But then come, just before, like the week or two before their cycle starts, a lot of times that's when we see or feel the hormone shifts happening, the blood sugar changes happening. So very, very often I see a couple of things at that point. So this is like a week or two before their period starts, is increasing fat to protein can definitely help at those times. And then the other thing is that making sure, or trying to experiment with darker meat, so ruminant or red meats during those times as well. And then if, they might notice that at the beginning of the cycle, they can have lighter meats, poultries, or, like darker white chicken, fish, things of that nature. And, of course, red meats at that time too. But I do see a lot of women that have a lot of benefit from increasing their fat, as well as increasing the amount of red meats or ruminant meat that they're eating 1 to 2 weeks prior to their cycle starting. And then as far as men goes, I also see sometimes under eating protein with men. And, of course, if they're into fitness, working out, lifting weights, they're looking to raise testosterone levels. All of those are going to, protein is going to play a key role with all of that as well.
Oh, that's fascinating. I haven't actually heard of it in that context of it, protein and fat. I do around carbs. People talk about, around. I know for me personally, I always do have a few cravings. Sort of a few days leading up to my cycle, my period, and before I completely overhauled my diet, I mean, that was when I was just eating ice cream and chocolate.
Yes, 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 very
Uh,
much so. So I
yeah.
see also that week before and what you're talking about, the cravings. Sometimes it can also be a need for more B vitamins. Other times I also see a need for more electrolytes, electrolyte minerals. And then again, just can be changing up that protein to fat to protein ratio, or sometimes just eating a little bit more in general. So um, I'm just going to reference calories just for the sake of our conversation, but let's just say somebody is comfortable most of the month at about 1,800 calories. And then that week before their cycle, they get, hungrier, the cravings increase a little bit, just kind of kicking that up a little bit to maybe 2,000 or 2,100 calories. So that might mean an extra 4 to 6 or 7 ounces of meat a day, or an extra couple servings of fat a day. Whether that's added as a separate meal. If someone's eating 2 meals, that's 3 meals. 3 meals, it might be 4 meals, or 3 meals in a small meal. Or they're just increasing the amount of food by a little bit at the meals that they're used to eating. That can help significantly a week before the period, with the cravings and some of the other symptoms that you were just mentioning.
Mm, that's really interesting. I think what I'm getting from this conversation is that it's very, what we tend to do is find the routine and do the same thing each day. But what you're saying is that there can be some real benefit to cycling, for want of a better word, or just tweaking things around the cycle. I think it's not really something I've given a lot of thought to, but it sounds like it can be really, really impactful to look at that, particularly if you have a regular cycle. What about if it's you're in menopause and you actually don't have your cycle anymore? How does does it change, or do we? I've heard people say we still get the same sort of things even though we're not, having
Yeah,
our period anymore.
so that's a great question. So a couple of things on that. So first of all, yes, many women cycle, their bodies cycle beyond getting their period. So for those women, I usually suggest like keeping a little bit of a journal when they're feeling certain ways, so that we can start to look at patterns. And so that's one way to approach that. And then once you see the pattern, you can, make some changes based on what those patterns are. You can also just, if let's just say somebody doesn't see a pattern, or they're not feeling anything happening, they can just kind of take it in 2 to 4 week increments and make changes for 2 weeks at a time and see if they notice any differences. Where I see people making mistakes here is when they make a change every few days. So that's too soon. We would never know, a couple of days isn't long enough to notice any differences. But usually 2 weeks at a time to kind of change things up is a good time frame to like notice something. Or if you notice nothing, that's great. And if you notice a negative change, even in a shorter period of time, then that's great. Don't continue. Then you have that data as well that didn't work.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's fantastic. Great tips and great advice. I'd love to get your view on the protein. I know most people listening to this podcast they well understand that animal protein is superior to plants. But because I try and get myself into the space of people who are just curious, to come in to listen. So what is it? Is it just does it come just down to the nutrients in terms of the benefit of animal protein over plants? Is there something else we can consider around all that? Obviously animal protein, you've mentioned it a few times. It's clearly something that you rate. Can we understand that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I just, in my own experience with eating animal protein versus plant protein sources and plants in general, um, I notice a huge difference in energy, mood, focus, clarity. Those are, main things, as well as like recovering better from workouts and things like that. Less bloating, so the digestion is much better with animal-based proteins than with plant-based proteins, plant-based foods. I've even when I've, in the time years ago when I've been ketovore, even having some veggies and stuff, like I've always noticed, like I know that those foods contain protein, like I've used pea protein powder and other plant protein sources. I just never do well energetically, digestively, on any of those foods. So I feel like if I'm bloated and have fogginess and lack of energy eating those foods, and I'm, for the most part, a little bit more balanced than the clients that I work with, I kind of, some clients I will experiment and have them use some of those foods and we see how they respond, but oftentimes they just don't respond as well. Or maybe they're eating plant-based foods currently and they've not really tried more animal-based. So we will do some experimentation with switching up sources, different foods, fish, chicken, different types of protein, different types of animal protein. And again, it's that experimentation where you really have to do some of that to learn what feels right metabolically.
Yeah, it is important to do it. I mean, the world's on a big plant-based push at the moment. And I mean, virtually every person I talk to outside the space is just doesn't, they just think that plants are superior and that's the optimal diet. And, we can heal ourselves and heal the planet by eating more plants. But of course, I mean, I think the opposite is true. I think I know personally healing myself too through eating more animal protein and, ditching the plants. And, of course, we need ruminant animals for our environment. So it's just such a complete, I mean, I get it, I understand, but we have to dig a little deeper and try it ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, I've never had a one size fits all approach. So even I believe within, the space of low carb, keto, carnivore, whichever approach somebody takes, I really still feel like it's an individual approach. There's no one size fits all. So two people that are keto probably need to do different things. Two people that are carnivore are going to be, do well on two different approaches. That's why I feel like we hear about some people that do great on beef, salt, and water, and some people that can, do great on ribeye only, and then others who have to, have eggs, and some thrive on dairy. I mean, there's so many differences with dairy in and of itself. And then, adding in lamb and pork and chicken and just different, there's just so many different approaches. It's just, it really, everyone should like realize like there really is no one size fits all, even within quote unquote low carb, quote unquote keto, quote unquote carnivore.
Yeah. So stop searching for the one size fits all because it doesn't exist.
That's absolutely the moral of the story, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But there are some overriding themes, as you say. Look, generally most people do better on protein, quality fats, all that sort of stuff. And I had another question for you about that, but it's completely gone. About the one size fits all approach, but it doesn't matter. It's gone. It's been so lovely chatting. Oh, that's what it was. It quickly came back to me.
I knew it was going to come back to you.
I know. Just touching on dairy.
Yeah.
So I know we've just said there's no one size fits all, but does dairy fit in a little bit of a different category?
I love this question. So, in general, so with dairy, some people can tolerate it, some people won't. Some people have, there's various types of sensitivities. We can be sensitive to the lactose, you can be sensitive to the protein in dairy or the casein. And then when you look at how dairy products are made, so if you take milk and cream and cheese and yogurt and other cottage cheese and other types of dairy, they're all made slightly differently. So all of these things are factors in what we could see different reactions to. So for example, like one of the food sensitivity tests that I use in my practice tests multiple types of dairy cow's milk, cheddar cheese, yogurt, and because they all do, they can have different properties, if you will, and have different responses in the body. So
Mm.
somebody who might be sensitive to cow's milk might be able to tolerate a little bit of cheese. Somebody who's sensitive to yogurt might be able to tolerate, or to cheese might be able to tolerate a little bit of yogurt. So I think that, people still need to be careful with quality, the source. Raw dairy always is greater than pasteurized dairy, things of that nature. But I also don't believe that it's a one size fits all with dairy as well. Then if we bring in other factors like cross reactivity to gluten, if for people that have celiac or autoimmune stuff going on, like there's just so many levels of, let's really break this down into the individual body, the individual metabolism, and make sure that, whatever they're doing is a fit for the person, and that the main goal is rebalancing from the inside out.
Yeah, I love that. And I think too, it can be quite hard to know if you have a sensitivity, because I think sometimes our body gets just so used to it, doesn't it? I took out dairy. I love dairy. I
Yeah.
loved but when I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, I took that out, and I did find it really quite hard. But I went through some really serious gut symptoms after I took it out. But after 3 months, everything sort of settled, and I tried a little bit, and I felt the reaction. So I'd had that distance and was able to then really feel the reaction in my body. But I haven't had a food sensitivity test, but I think that would be a really helpful thing to get done to find that out.
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. So first of all, it's very helpful because we can have a reaction to a sensitive food up to 96 hours after we eat that food. So if you
Mhm.
think about all the foods that you would eat in like a 4-day period or 96 hours, that's a lot of foods, and it can be very, very hard to track what caused what. So that's first
Yeah.
thing. So, and then the next thing with what you mentioned with the dairy is that when we remove foods that we're sensitive to, whether it's dairy, whether it's various vegetables, even, we can be sensitive to chicken, beef, other animal proteins, even though they're animal sources, even though they're healthy foods. If once we remove the offending food and the body has time, the immune system and the gut has time to do some healing, and we reintroduce that food, two things will happen. Number one, you won't feel any reaction. You might feel really good when you eat that food. Or number two, you might actually notice, oh, I got bloated. I got a headache. I got tired immediately after I ate. I got a runny nose. My sinuses got clogged up. And so that would basically indicate that your system is actually working correctly, working the way it's supposed to, because it actually responded to the food the way it is it intended when an inflammatory food enters your system.
Yeah. Wow. I really love that. And just that understanding. Yes, when we do heal, we probably, can, I think it's healing our gut, healing our immune system, but also our emotional system, that
Yes.
whole emotional terrain that we sit in. That was a big one for me. I've found that that's really, really helped. I think I can tolerate a lot, more than I was able to in the past now, because, I've done the work to kind of heal all of that stuff. There's so many little puzzle pieces, isn't there? It's never a just diet, or it's never a just this or just that. It's so many combinations of different things to feel good, but we can do it. We can do it. It's all
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, well, what a great chat. I've really, really enjoyed your insight and knowledge. And thanks so much for sharing it all with my listeners today. It's been such a great pleasure.
No problem, Tracy. Thank you so much for having me. It was great to meet you and great to chat. And I'll look forward to chatting with you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dani.